The rain pounded against the windshield as Daniel, an Uber driver in his mid-40s, pulled up to a dimly lit curb. It had been a long, exhausting day, but he had accepted one last ride before heading home. As he glanced at his phone, he saw the name, Emma. The pickup location was in an upscale part of the city, but the moment he saw her, something felt off. Emma, a woman in her late 20s, stumbled into the back seat, her face pale, her breathing uneven. Her expensive dress was soaked from the rain, and there was a nervous tremble in her hands as she clutched a leather folder against her chest. "Are you okay, miss?" Daniel asked, adjusting the rearview mirror to look at her. "Just drive," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "Please, just get me away from here." Her voice carried urgency, fear. Daniel hesitated for a second, but then nodded and pulled onto the road. "Where to?" he asked. She hesitated. "Anywhere but here." Daniel's grip on the wheel tightened. He had seen all kinds of passengers in his years of driving, but something about this woman's desperation unsettled him. Before he could ask more, headlights flashed in the mirror. A sleek black SUV was following them, matching every turn he made. Who was following her? And why? Daniel's heart pounded as he checked the rearview mirror. The black SUV was still there, tailing them through every turn. This wasn't a coincidence. Emma sat rigid in the back seat, gripping the leather folder so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Who's following you?" Daniel asked, keeping his voice calm despite the growing tension. Emma hesitated. I don't know," she said, but her shaky voice told him she was lying. Daniel made a sharp turn down a side street, hoping to lose the SUV, but it followed. "Hang on," he muttered. He slammed the gas pedal and weaved through the streets. The SUV sped up, keeping close. "They don't want to hurt me," Emma finally admitted, her voice trembling. "They want this." She lifted the folder. "What's in it?" She hesitated. "Evidence. Proof that the CEO of Clarion Corp has been laundering millions and framing innocent people for it." Daniel's stomach dropped. Clarion Corp was one of the most powerful companies in the city. Messing with them was like signing a death sentence. "I was their finance officer," she continued. "I found out the truth. Now, they want to silence me before I can expose them." The SUV was gaining on them. Daniel knew they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. His instincts kicked in. If he didn't act fast, they'd both be in serious danger. He made a split-second decision and swerved into an underground parking garage, killing the headlights and pulling into a dark corner. The SUV roared past, speeding down the street. Silence. Emma let out a shaky breath. "Thank you," she whispered, but Daniel knew this wasn't over. Not even close. Daniel kept a firm grip on the wheel, his breath steady but mind racing. The SUV had driven past, but he knew they'd be back. A powerful corporation like Clarion Corp wouldn't just give up. "We can't stay here," he said, keeping his voice low. Emma wiped at her eyes and nodded. I don't know what to do," she admitted. "I thought I could just go to the police, but Clarion has them in their pocket." Daniel clenched his jaw. This was bad, really bad. "I need to get to a reporter," Emma continued. "Someone who can take this public before they can bury the truth." Daniel glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "Do you know one you can trust?" She hesitated. "Yes, Adrian Wells. He's an investigative journalist. But if they suspect I'm going to him, they'll..." A sudden vibration broke the silence. Emma looked at her phone. Her face went pale. "They've traced me," she whispered. Daniel didn't hesitate. He hit the gas, peeling out of the garage and back onto the streets. Behind them, headlights flared. "They're back." Daniel pushed the car to its limits, swerving through traffic. The SUV followed relentlessly, its driver determined. "We need to disappear," Daniel muttered. "I know a place." Emma clutched the folder to her chest as Daniel veered off onto a deserted side road. But the SUV was still coming. They weren't getting away that easily. The tires screeched as Daniel took a sharp turn, sending the car careening down an alley. Emma's grip tightened on the folder, her heart pounding in sync with the fast-beating rhythm of the car's engine. "You sure about this?" Emma asked, her voice shaky. "This place you're taking me?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. His eyes were locked on the road, constantly checking the rearview mirror. The black SUV was still there, tailing them like a shadow. The tension in the air was suffocating, but Daniel kept his focus. "It's the only place I can think of," he finally replied, his voice tight with urgency. "Trust me, it's secure." Emma's mind was racing. She knew they were running out of time. The contents of that folder were worth a fortune to the people they were running from. Valuable information, potentially catastrophic to Clarion Corp's empire. If they could just get to the journalist, they could make sure this went public. But the question was, how long would they be able to stay one step ahead of the corporate henchmen? A loud honk shattered her thoughts as the SUV's driver accelerated, gaining on them. They were gaining ground, faster. Emma urged, her hand clutching the handle above the window. Daniel slammed his foot onto the gas, the engine roaring as they sped through the narrow streets. But just as they reached the end of the alley, an unexpected roadblock emerged. A large delivery truck parked in the middle of the street. Daniel swerved to avoid it, but the SUV wasn't as nimble. The truck collided with it, sending the vehicle into a spin. "And no," Emma gasped as the SUV's tires screeched in protest. It was moments away from crashing into a nearby wall. "Hold on," Daniel shouted, jerking the steering wheel left to avoid a collision. The car careened down the street and onto another alley. The SUV wasn't far behind, but Daniel was already planning his next move that Emma's eyes darted nervously. "We have to get rid of them. They'll never stop chasing us unless—" "I know," Daniel cut in, his voice full of determination. "And I have an idea." Daniel's mind was spinning, calculating the next move as he navigated through the winding alleyways. He knew they were running out of options, and every second felt like a countdown to disaster. Emma's anxious breathing beside him only added to the tension. "We can't outrun them forever," she said, her voice strained with worry. "I know," Daniel replied, his jaw set in determination. He glanced at the rearview mirror. The black SUV was still behind them, getting closer with every turn. "Are you sure about this?" Emma asked, looking at him with a mix of fear and trust. "This plan of yours." Daniel didn't look at her as he took another sharp turn, skidding across the wet pavement. "I'm not sure about anything anymore," he said, his voice quieter. "But it's the only chance we have." He glanced to his left, spotting a narrow street that led into a dimly lit underground parking garage. It was risky, but it was the only escape route he could see. He slammed on the brakes and turned sharply into the alleyway, the tires squealing as they entered the garage. "Get ready," Daniel warned Emma, his grip tight on the steering wheel. The black SUV followed them into the garage, but it was too late. Daniel floored the accelerator, sending the car speeding into an empty parking spot, barely avoiding the concrete pillars as he turned sharply. The SUV, not expecting the sudden maneuver, continued straight, crashing into a pillar with a loud crunch. Daniel didn't waste a second. He threw the car into reverse and slammed the gas pedal again, reversing out of the parking garage just as the SUV's driver was trying to back out of the wreckage. Emma's heart raced as she watched the chaos unfold behind them. "We're getting away." "Not yet," Daniel muttered. The garage led to another exit, a back alley that opened up into a busy intersection. They couldn't stay in the garage forever, and they knew the SUV would eventually regroup. But for now, they had a brief window of opportunity. Daniel turned into the alley and then sped down the main road, weaving through traffic. He glanced in the rearview mirror, watching the SUV pull out of the garage, but now far behind. They were gaining distance. Emma was silent for a moment before finally speaking. "Where are we going now?" "I know a place," Daniel replied, his voice firm. "A safe house. It's the only place we can go for now." "Then let's get there before they catch up," Emma said, her voice resolute. They raced down the road, the city lights blurring in a kaleidoscope of neon as they tried to put as much distance between themselves and the people chasing them. But despite the brief sense of relief, neither of them could shake the feeling that this wasn't over yet. The real fight was just beginning. The safe house was hidden in plain sight. A simple, unassuming brownstone tucked between two high-rise buildings in a quiet corner of the city. It was the kind of place that blended into the urban landscape, unnoticed by the world. Daniel had used this location in the past for moments like this when things went sideways and he needed to disappear. As he pulled up to the curb, he took a long breath, glancing over at Emma. Her face was pale, and her hands were trembling. This was more than just an escape. It was survival. "Stay close," he said as he killed the engine. "And don't make any noise." Emma nodded, her expression focused. She followed Daniel as he led her to the building's rear entrance. He had a key, but the lock was old, rusted, and barely worked. After a few attempts, it clicked open, and they slipped inside into the dimly lit hallway. The air in the house was stale, as if it hadn't been used in months, but it was safe, quiet, isolated. The kind of place where no one would come looking for them. For now, Daniel led her up the stairs to a small, unremarkable apartment. Inside, there was a bed, a desk, and a few basic amenities. A tiny kitchen sat in the corner, and a single window overlooked the alley below. "We'll rest here tonight," Daniel said, locking the door behind them. "But tomorrow we move." Emma took a seat on the edge of the bed, running her hands through her hair. She still looked exhausted, but there was something else in her eyes, a determination, a sense of resolve. "I don't understand," she said, her voice softer now. "Why are they after us? What do they want?" Daniel sank into the chair across from her, his hands resting on his knees. He looked tired too, though he tried to hide it. "They want me gone. All of this, my life, my past, it's all tied to something I've been running from. Something I can't let them take. And if we don't stop them, they'll keep coming." "Running from what?" Daniel met her gaze, and for the first time, he let down his guard. The weight of his secrets, the burden of the years spent hiding, felt heavier than ever. But he knew she deserved the truth. "My father, he's been the one pulling the strings. I'm not just some regular guy, Emma. My family has power, influence, and a lot of enemies." Emma's eyes widened, but she didn't say anything. She could tell there was more, but Daniel wasn't ready to share everything. "Who are these people chasing us?" she asked instead, trying to keep the conversation moving. "Are they after you because of your family?" "They're a mercenary group," Daniel said. "They've been hired to find me. They think I have something they need, and if they get their hands on it, they'll destroy everything." "And you just trying to outrun them?" Emma asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Not exactly. We're going to end this." She leaned forward. "Ow!" Daniel gave a bitter smile. "One way or another, I'm going to make sure they don't come after anyone again, starting with them." He stood up and walked to the window, peering out into the dark city. His thoughts were clouded with the faces of his enemies. The people who had once been allies now turned ruthless predators. Emma stood behind him. "You're not doing this alone," she said, her voice firm. "I'll help you. We'll get through this together." Daniel turned to her, grateful for the support, but also knowing how dangerous it was. She was already in too deep, and if he wasn't careful, she might end up in even more trouble than before. "I don't want you to get hurt," he said quietly. "This isn't a game. These people won't stop until they have what they want." "I'm already in this, Daniel," Emma replied. "And I'm not going anywhere." Daniel studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "All right, tomorrow we make our move. We can't wait much longer. They'll be after us soon enough." The night passed uneventfully, but the silence in the safe house was heavy. Daniel lay awake on the couch, his mind racing with all the possible outcomes, the risks, the moves they needed to make to stay one step ahead of those who were hunting them. His thoughts circled back to Emma. He couldn't afford to put her in danger. She was already in too deep. The morning light filtered through the cracked blinds, signaling the start of a new day. Emma had already woken up by the time Daniel rubbed his eyes, stretching his stiff limbs. He glanced over at her as she leaned against the counter, sipping coffee, her expression distant. "Morning," she said quietly when she noticed him stir. "Morning," Daniel replied, standing up and moving toward the table. "We need to talk about what happens next." Emma didn't say anything at first, just set down her cup and looked at him. She knew there were no more games to be played. They were beyond that point. The stakes were higher now. "I've been thinking," Daniel started, his voice firm as he met her eyes. "We can't stay here for long. They'll figure out where we are soon enough. We need to make sure we hit them before they hit us." "You're planning something, aren't you?" Emma asked, her voice more curious now, less apprehensive. "Yeah," Daniel said, nodding. "We need to get to the source. The people who hired these mercenaries. I know where they are. There's a corporate event tonight. It's the perfect opportunity to infiltrate. Emma's eyebrows furrowed. Infiltrate? You're not seriously suggesting we just walk in there and confront them, are you? We don't have much of a choice, Daniel replied. We can't keep running. It's now or never. Emma looked at him for a moment, trying to read his face. What if they catch us? What if it goes wrong? Daniel exhaled sharply. His eyes darkened with the weight of the decision he was about to make. I don't intend to let it go wrong. She studied him for a long moment, and then, as if a switch had flipped, she nodded. All right, I'm in. Daniel smiled, albeit briefly, before turning his attention to the bag sitting by the door. He grabbed a few things, clothes, gear, and his phone. We don't have a lot of time. Let's get to work. The corporate event was held at a lavish hotel downtown. Daniel had been to events like this before. He knew the drill, the handshakes, the small talk, the fake smiles. But this wasn't about networking or making connections. This was about one thing: getting to the heart of the operation and ending this nightmare once and for all. They arrived at the venue under the guise of guests. Daniel dressed in a sleek suit, blending in with the elite crowd, while Emma wore a simple but elegant black dress. She looked like she belonged there, which was part of the plan. They entered the hotel and were immediately met by security. The tension in the air was palpable. There were whispers among the staff as they passed by. But Daniel knew they couldn't afford to attract attention. They needed to get closer to the target without being seen. Stay close, Daniel whispered to Emma. We need to find a meeting room. They moved through the grand lobby, past the elegant chandeliers and polished marble floors. The lavish decor felt almost out of place, considering the danger that was closing in on them. As they reached the back hallway, Daniel's phone buzzed. He checked it briefly, glancing over at Emma to make sure she was still by his side. It's them, Daniel said quietly. The mercenaries are already here. Emma's heart raced, but she didn't hesitate. What's the plan? Daniel took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the hall. We stick to the shadows. Find a back entrance to the meeting room. Once we're inside, we'll confront the people behind this. It's the only way to end it. They moved quietly through the hallways, careful not to attract attention. The noise from the event's main hall muffled their movements. As they reached a small service door, Daniel stopped. Wait here, he said. I'll go in first. He pushed open the door slowly, peeking inside. The room was dimly lit, with a long conference table and several men seated around it. Among them was a man Daniel recognized, Victor Winters, the man behind the mercenaries. Daniel's fists clenched. This was it. This was the man who had been pulling the strings all along. He motioned for Emma to follow, and together they slipped inside, making sure the door closed silently behind them. The men at the table didn't seem to notice at first. Daniel knew he didn't have much time. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the quiet room. Victor, he said, his tone cold, but full of intent. We need to talk. The men at the table looked up, startled. Victor's eyes locked on Daniel, his expression a mixture of surprise and disdain. What is this? Victor sneered. Who are you? I'm the man you've been hunting, Daniel said, his voice unwavering. And now, I'm here to take you down. Victor chuckled, but it was a nervous, tense laugh. You think you could just walk in here and threaten me? Emma stepped forward beside Daniel, her face calm, but her eyes burning with determination. We've already been running, Emma said. It ends tonight. The tension in the room was thick, but Daniel could sense that the mercenaries around the table were nervous. This wasn't going according to their plan. Victor's eyes flickered toward the door, and for a brief moment, Daniel knew that something was about to change. Victor's gaze flickered briefly to the door, but Daniel was too quick. He was already moving, his instincts kicking in. He knew that the moment they were in this room, they were on borrowed time. The mercenaries wouldn't just sit idly by while their employer was threatened. They had to act fast. Before anyone could reach for a weapon, Daniel slammed the door shut behind them, locking it with a quick twist of the handle. The mercenaries exchanged glances, and Daniel could see the shift in their posture. They were calculating, weighing their options. But Emma was beside him, her eyes focused and ready. Victor's face twisted into a grin, his arrogance evident. You think you could take me down, kid? Do you even know who I am? Does it matter? Daniel shot back. You're nothing but a pawn. And it's time for this game to end. Emma's hand brushed against his arm, a reassuring touch that steadied him. She could see that Daniel was ready for this. He wasn't just confronting Victor. He was taking control of the situation. It was clear now that he wasn't just some regular guy. He had the fire, the will to face whatever came next. Victor stood, motioning to his men. Get them, he ordered with a sharp command. The mercenaries moved swiftly, but Daniel was already prepared. He grabbed the nearest chair, hurling it toward one of the men who was about to draw his gun. The chair hit him square in the chest, knocking him off balance. The other mercenary lunged for Daniel, but he sidestepped, his hands grabbing the man's arm and twisting him to the floor. Emma wasn't just standing idly by either. As the chaos unfolded, she grabbed a metal tray from a nearby table and swung it at another mercenary who had been coming toward her. The clang of metal against bone echoed through the room as the man staggered back, momentarily stunned. Victor had retreated to the far corner of the room, his expression darkening with frustration. Daniel could feel the heat of the moment, the stakes rising with each passing second. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was a fight for their lives. We can't just fight our way out of this, Daniel called out to Emma as he threw another punch to knock down one of the men. We need to get to the source. We need to stop Victor. Emma nodded, her face flushed with determination. Then let's finish this. Victor, realizing that his men weren't going to win this fight, began backing toward the far door of the conference room. You're making a huge mistake, kid, he said, his voice tinged with desperation. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Daniel's eyes narrowed. I think I have a pretty good idea. And it's over. With a swift movement, Daniel lunged at Victor, tackling him to the ground before he could reach the door. The mercenary leader's back slammed into the floor with a heavy thud, and the air was knocked out of him. You think you can walk away from this? Daniel hissed, his hands gripping Victor's collar as he forced him to face him. You've been hunting us for far too long. And it ends tonight. Victor's breath came in short gasps. He was pinned beneath Daniel, unable to move. His face twisted into a mask of rage, but there was something else there too, fear. You'll regret this, Victor spat. You don't know who I work for. You don't understand the consequences of what you're doing. I don't need to know your bosses, Daniel said with finality. I'm ending this now. Emma, catching her breath, moved toward the door to stand guard. Daniel, we don't have much time. We need to get out of here before reinforcements show up. Daniel nodded, still holding Victor down. You're right. This isn't over, but it will be soon. He let go of Victor's collar and stood, his hand still gripping the man's arm. Listen, Victor, I don't care who you work for. If you come after me or anyone I care about again, I will make sure you regret it. Do I make myself clear? Victor was silent for a moment, his eyes burning with hatred. But it was clear. He knew he had lost. There was no way out for him now. Good, Daniel said, his voice cold as he released Victor's arm and stepped back. Now, get out of here. Victor scrambled to his feet, his expression a mixture of fury and fear. He gave Daniel one last glare before turning and bolting toward the exit. We're not done, he muttered under his breath, his voice muffled by the sound of the door slamming behind him. Daniel let out a breath, turning to Emma. It's over. For now. She gave him a small smile, but it was filled with exhaustion. I hope so, but we should go now. This place is probably crawling with people who are looking for us. Daniel nodded, motioning for her to follow him. We'll be out of here in 2 minutes. We're not staying a second longer than we have to. As they moved toward the exit, Daniel couldn't help but feel the weight of what had just happened. They had done it. They had stopped Victor. They had taken control. But deep down, Daniel knew this wasn't the end of the road. The people behind Victor, the ones pulling the strings, were still out there. They still had to be dealt with. But for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt hope. He wasn't just running anymore. He was taking control of his life. And he was going to make sure that no one ever threatened him or Emma again. The tension in the air was palpable as Daniel and Emma hurried through the narrow corridor leading to the rear exit. Their footsteps echoed off the sterile walls, the soft whoosh of the air conditioning offering an eerie contrast to the chaos they had just left behind. We've got to move quickly, Emma urged, glancing nervously over her shoulder. We don't know how long before Victor's backup arrives. Daniel nodded, his mind racing. He was still processing the confrontation with Victor, how he'd been able to overpower the mercenaries and finally corner their leader. But that victory was only temporary. The real fight was far from over. They had taken down one piece of the puzzle, but the organization Victor worked for was massive, and it wasn't going to let one failure slide. Not without repercussions. As they reached the back door of the building, Daniel turned to Emma. We need a plan. We can't just run forever. There's a bigger fight ahead. Emma paused, her expression darkening. I know, but we can't just walk into it blindly. We need information. We need to find out who Victor was working for and what their endgame is. Daniel felt a surge of determination. We'll figure it out. Together. They stepped outside, the cool night air hitting their faces like a sharp slap. The city was alive with the hum of distant traffic, the occasional honk of a car, and the muffled sounds of nightlife in full swing. But for them, it felt like a world away. They were fugitives hiding in plain sight. Emma checked the area, her sharp eyes scanning for any signs of danger. We'll need to lay low, get to a safe spot, and regroup. Figure out what our next move is. Daniel's thoughts were already racing ahead. They couldn't afford to be on the run for long. He needed to know who was after him and why. Let's go to the old diner by the edge of town, he suggested, his voice low. It's secluded. No one will bother us there. Emma nodded, and they quickly made their way toward the street. As they passed the alleyway, Daniel noticed a dark figure lurking in the shadows, watching them intently. His pulse quickened, and he motioned for Emma to stop. What is it? Emma whispered. I don't know, Daniel replied, his eyes locked on the figure. Stay close. He took a step forward, his senses on high alert. The figure didn't move, but Daniel could feel the tension building. It was as if the world was holding its breath. Then, without warning, the figure stepped out of the shadows. It was a man, tall and imposing, wearing a suit that screamed money. His face was partially obscured by a dark cap, but Daniel could see the cold, calculating gleam in his eyes. You're not getting away that easily, the man said, his voice low and menacing. Daniel didn't hesitate. His body was already in motion, shifting to put himself between Emma and the stranger. Who are you? He demanded, his voice sharp. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step forward, his hand reaching inside his jacket. Daniel's heart raced. He knew what was coming. Get back, Daniel shouted, his mind racing for an escape plan. But the man was too fast. He pulled a sleek, black gun from his jacket and pointed it directly at Daniel. Move, and you're dead, the man growled. Emma gasped, stepping back. But Daniel didn't flinch. He wasn't afraid. This was just another challenge, another obstacle to overcome. I don't think so, Daniel said coolly, his voice steady despite the gun aimed at him. You have no idea who you're dealing with. The man laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the quiet street. You think you're some kind of hero? You're nothing. Just a kid trying to play with the big boys. I'm not playing, Daniel retorted, his eyes narrowing. I'm finishing this. Before the man could react, Daniel moved with lightning speed. He grabbed the arm holding the gun, twisting it and forcing the weapon from the man's grip. A swift knee to the chest sent the man stumbling back, crashing into the nearby wall. Emma's eyes widened with disbelief. How did you? Daniel didn't answer. He was already moving toward the fallen man, his eyes locked on the gun, now lying on the ground. He picked it up, his fingers tightening around the cold metal. This wasn't a fight he wanted, but it was one he had to finish. The man groaned as he struggled to rise. You think you've won? You have no idea what you've just gotten yourself into. I know exactly what I'm getting into, Daniel said, his voice calm and dangerous. And it's over. With one final movement, he raised the gun, pointing it at the man. The stranger froze, his eyes wide with fear. You're not going to shoot me, kid, the man sneered, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Not today, Daniel said with finality, lowering the gun. He tossed it aside. But don't come near us again. The man's eyes shifted from the weapon to Daniel's unwavering gaze. Then, with a low growl, he turned and fled into the night. Daniel watched him go, his heart still racing, but the adrenaline beginning to subside. Emma was silent beside him, her face pale from the close call. "That was too close," Emma said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," Daniel replied, taking a deep breath. "But we can't afford to stop. We need to get to that diner. Now." Emma nodded, and together they continued their journey, aware that their lives had just changed forever. The small diner at the edge of town stood as a quiet refuge amid the chaos of their lives. As Daniel and Emma entered, the warm scent of coffee and grilled food filled the air. The dim lighting and cozy atmosphere were a stark contrast to the dark, dangerous events they had just narrowly escaped. It was a place that felt safe, familiar, something they hadn't felt in far too long. They slid into a booth in the corner, their eyes constantly scanning the room as if expecting danger to follow them. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with a kind smile, came over to take their order. But Daniel wasn't thinking about food that he needed answers. He needed to know who the man in the alley was and why he'd been so intent on hunting him down. It was clear that their enemies weren't just working on an individual level. They were part of something much bigger, something far more dangerous. "I need a phone," Daniel said to Emma, his voice low. "I need to make a call." Emma looked at him, her brow furrowing. "To who?" Daniel hesitated, glancing around the diner as if the walls might have ears. "I have a contact, someone who can help us figure out what's going on." She nodded, pulling out her phone and handing it to him. She knew he had a lot of connections, many of which were deep within the underground world. She didn't ask questions. She trusted him that as Daniel dialed the number. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was a turning point. They were in too deep now, and there was no going back. But there was something else too, a sense of inevitability. He had known, deep down, that he was always meant to be involved in something like this. It was the reason he had always felt out of place in his normal life. The phone rang once, twice, then a familiar voice answered. "Daniel," the voice said, smooth and calculated. "I've been waiting for your call. I need information. Who are they, and what do they want with me?" Daniel asked, his voice tight with urgency. The person on the other end of the line chuckled, a dark sound that sent a shiver down Daniel's spine. "I figured you'd come around eventually. You've been a pawn in a much bigger game than you realize. I'm surprised it took you this long to figure it out." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. "What game? Who are you talking about?" "The people who've been chasing you? They work for a powerful organization, Daniel. One that controls everything. But you..." The voice paused, a slight laugh following. "You're not just some target. You've got something they want. Something only you have." Daniel leaned back in the booth, trying to process the information. "What do I have?" The voice chuckled again. "You've been kept in the dark long enough. But you'll find out soon enough. You're too close to the truth. You've got no choice now but to follow the trail." Before Daniel could respond, the line went dead. Emma was watching him intently. "Who was that?" Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. "That was someone I trust. But they're being cryptic. It's a huge organization we're up against. They want something from me, something I don't even know I have." Emma sat down across from him, concern etched on her face. "What do we do now?" Daniel stared out the window, the lights of the city blurring past in the night. "We find out what they want, and we stop them." The rest of the night was a blur of strategizing and preparing for what lay ahead. They couldn't stay in the diner forever, but they needed a place to regroup and plan their next steps. Daniel knew they were in too deep to go back to their old lives, and running was no longer an option. They had to confront whatever was coming head-on. The waitress returned with their coffee, giving them a curious look as she set the cups down on the table, but she didn't ask questions. It was as if she'd seen enough strangers come through here with troubled faces to know not to push. Emma took a sip of her coffee, her gaze steady. "I don't know about you, but I'm not going down without a fight." Daniel smiled faintly. "Neither am I, but we need to be smart about this. We can't afford any mistakes." The two of them spent hours talking, hashing out their options. Daniel's contact had given them some information, but it wasn't enough. They needed more. A plan that would take them to the heart of the operation, where they could uncover what the organization was after and put an end to it before it consumed them both. As dawn broke, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Daniel and Emma were ready to take the next step. Their first move was clear. They needed to track down the rest of Victor's associates and find out what they knew about the mysterious organization. They couldn't do it alone. They needed allies. "We start by getting to the people Victor worked with," Daniel said. "We need leverage, something to force them to talk." Emma nodded, her determination mirroring his. "We'll get it. We'll take down this whole thing. Together." As they left the diner, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that the war was only just beginning. But one thing was certain. He wasn't going to face it alone. The morning air was crisp, and the city streets hummed with life as Daniel and Emma set out to meet their first contact. The world felt different now, as if the veil had been lifted and they could see the hidden forces at play. Every step they took felt like a step toward unraveling a mystery much larger than they could have imagined. They arrived at a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of the city, tucked away behind an abandoned lot. It didn't look like much on the outside, but Daniel knew better than to judge a book by its cover. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him as they walked toward the entrance, their footsteps echoing in the empty streets. Inside the warehouse, a small group of people was waiting. They were from different walks of life. Some were former business people, others were mercenaries or hackers, but they all had one thing in common. They had worked with Victor in the past. They had all been involved in some capacity with the mysterious organization Daniel and Emma were trying to uncover. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with tension. At the far end, a tall man with short-cropped hair stood next to a large table covered in maps and documents. His piercing gaze shifted to Daniel as they walked in. "Daniel," he said, his voice gravelly but calm. "I wasn't sure you'd show up." "Didn't have much of a choice," Daniel replied, keeping his tone steady. "I need information. The people who are after me, they're bigger than I thought. I need to know everything you can tell me about them." The man nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "You're asking for a lot. This isn't something you can just walk away from." "I'm not walking away," Daniel said, his voice firm. "I'm getting to the bottom of this." The man studied him for a long moment before gesturing for them to sit. "All right, let's talk." As Daniel and Emma sat across from the man, whose name was Marcus, they began to piece together the fragmented details they had gathered so far. Marcus revealed that the organization they were up against had deep ties in both corporate and political spheres. They had been operating under the radar for decades, controlling vast networks and using covert operations to manipulate people and events for their gain. Victor wasn't just a pawn, Marcus explained, his voice quiet, but laced with a note of warning. He was one of the higher-ups, but even he didn't know the full scope of what they were doing. None of US did. Daniel listened intently, his mind racing as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. "So what exactly do they want with me?" Marcus paused, then leaned in, his eyes locked on Daniel's. "They want control, and they believe you hold the key to their final plan." Emma's hand tightened around her coffee cup. "What kind of plan?" Marcus looked at her, his gaze steely. "The kind that could change everything. The kind that could make them untouchable." Daniel's stomach twisted. He wasn't sure if he wanted to know the answer, but the urgency was there. They were in this deep, and there was no turning back now. "We need to find out what their endgame is," Daniel said, his mind working through the possibilities. "And we need to stop them." Marcus leaned back, his fingers tapping the table rhythmically. "I'll help you, but this isn't something that can be done overnight. We need to move carefully, methodically. We can't afford any mistakes." Emma nodded, her resolve as strong as ever. "We're in this together, whatever it takes." The next few days were a blur of planning, gathering information, and setting traps. The more they learned, the more dangerous the situation became. It was clear that the organization wasn't just some rogue group. It was a well-oiled machine, and every move they made felt like part of a much larger scheme. One night, after a long stretch of surveillance, Daniel and Emma found themselves in front of a heavily guarded building, a place they believed was central to the organization's operations. Marcus had given them the location, and they knew that if they could get inside, they would find the answers they were looking for. The building was located in the heart of the city's financial district, surrounded by high-end security and surveillance systems. It was a fortress, and they had to be careful. One wrong move could get them caught or, worse, killed. "I don't like this," Emma muttered, looking up at the building's towering walls. "This is getting too close." "We have no choice," Daniel replied. "We get in, find the information, and get out. It's the only way." Together, they slipped through the shadows, moving quickly and quietly toward the back entrance. They had a plan, one that required precision and timing. If they succeeded, they would have the leverage they needed to go after the organization's leaders. But as they reached the back door, they saw something that made their blood run cold. The door was wide open, and a figure stepped out, their silhouette sharp against the dim light. That IT was a man in a suit, a man they recognized, Victor. Victor stood in the doorway, his face barely illuminated by the dim light of the street lamps. His expression was unreadable, and for a moment, Daniel and Emma froze, caught in a mixture of surprise and disbelief. How was Victor here? Wasn't he supposed to be out of the picture? The air between them thickened, as though every second that passed stretched into eternity. Victor's eyes flicked from Daniel to Emma, then back to Daniel, his lips curling into a slight smile. "I was wondering when you'd show up," Victor said, his voice calm, but there was an edge to it. "I've been waiting." You've been waiting for us?" Daniel asked, his voice strained with confusion. Victor stepped further into the light, his hands in his pockets, as though this was just another routine night for him. "You really thought you could uncover all of this without anyone noticing?" Emma stepped forward, her eyes narrowed. "What are you doing here, Victor? You were supposed to be gone. You told us you were out of the organization." Victor laughed, a cold sound that echoed down the alley. "Out? You really think I could just leave something like this? You've been played, Daniel. All of you have." Daniel's heart began to pound, and a sense of dread crept over him. This was it, the moment when everything he thought he knew began to fall apart. "You're still working for them," Daniel said slowly, realizing the full implication. "You never left." Victor's smile widened. "I'm not just working for them. I am them now. This entire operation, it was mine to begin with. You were just a pawn in a much larger game. And now, I'm in control." Daniel felt a chill crawl up his spine as he processed Victor's words. "You betrayed us." "Betrayal is such a strong word," Victor replied with a shrug. "Think of it more like an evolution. The organization needed a new face, and I'm the one who gave it to them." Emma's fists clenched, and she took a step toward Victor. "You lied to us. All this time, we trusted you." Victor's gaze hardened, and for the first time, a flicker of something darker passed through his eyes. "Trust is a luxury, Emma, and in this world, there's no room for it." Suddenly, without warning, Victor's hand shot out, and in a flash, a gun appeared in his grip. It was pointed directly at Daniel's chest. "Victor, stop!" Emma shouted, stepping in front of Daniel, her arms raised as though to shield him. Victor's laugh was dark and unsettling. "What? You think you can stop me? You're too late. The game is over." Daniel's mind raced, trying to think of a way out of this. He had to do something. He couldn't let Victor control everything. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. But Victor's finger tightened on the trigger, and the air felt charged, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, Victor's gun was yanked from his hands, soaring through the air before landing in the shadows. Emma had tackled him, her quick reflexes catching him off guard. For a moment, they struggled, Victor's dark eyes gleaming with rage as he pushed Emma off him. Daniel lunged forward, grabbing Victor's arm and twisting it behind his back. Victor grunted in pain, but didn't give up. "This isn't over," Victor growled, his voice a low snarl. "You can't win, Daniel. You don't even know what you're up against." Daniel's grip tightened as he held Victor down. "We're not finished yet. We will stop you." With a final, desperate movement, Daniel pressed his knee into Victor's back, pinning him to the ground. Emma stood over them, her breath coming in short bursts, her eyes blazing with anger. "This is over," Emma said firmly, her voice cold. "You've been playing us all along, but not anymore." Victor lay there for a moment, his face twisted with frustration. "You think you've won? You have no idea what's coming next. They won't let this go. You're all dead." Emma glanced at Daniel, who met her gaze, his determination clear. "We've faced worse," he said quietly, "and we're still standing." Before Daniel and Emma, could react, the sound of distant sirens began to echo in the alley. Someone had called the police. They didn't have much time. "We need to get out of here," Emma said urgently. "Now," Daniel nodded, his mind already racing through their next moves. They couldn't afford to stay here, not with Victor still alive and more danger on the horizon. But as they looked around, it was clear that the battle was far from over. Victor's words echoed in Daniel's mind as they hurriedly retreated into shadows. "You're dead." It was a chilling promise, one that would stay with him long after they'd escaped this alley. But they weren't giving up. Not now. Not when they were this close to the truth. Daniel and Emma barely made it out of the alley when the sound of sirens grew louder, signaling the imminent arrival of the police. They ran through the winding streets, their footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night, hearts pounding with adrenaline. As they reached a secluded corner of the city, Emma stopped suddenly, breathing heavily. "We can't keep running forever, Daniel. We need to figure out what's really going on." Daniel nodded, wiping the sweat from his forehead. He was still trying to process everything that had happened. They had just confronted Victor, the man who had manipulated them all along, and yet there was still something off about the situation. Something wasn't adding up. "Victor, he's not working alone, is he?" Daniel said, looking at Emma with a growing sense of realization. Emma shook her head. "No, he's part of something bigger, something deeper. He always was." Daniel's mind raced. If Victor was just a pawn in a larger scheme, then what had they really been up against? And who else was involved? "Victor said something about us not knowing what we were up against," Daniel murmured. "But what did he mean by that?" "I don't know," Emma said, her expression troubled. "But I think we've only scratched the surface. Whatever this is, it's bigger than just him." The two of them stood in silence for a moment, trying to make sense of the chaos that had unfolded. Daniel's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one more disturbing than the last. He knew they couldn't run forever. They had to take control of the situation, find out who was behind it all, and put an end to it before things got worse. "We need to go back," Daniel said suddenly, his voice filled with resolve. "We need to find the source of all this, and we need to stop it." Emma hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "You're right. We can't let them get away with this." The next few days were a blur of planning and searching. Daniel and Emma spent every waking hour trying to uncover the secrets that had been hidden from them. They scoured old files, analyzed Victor's every move, and dug deeper into the organization that had been pulling the strings. But every lead they followed seemed to circle back to the same dead end. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't seem to get closer to the truth. It was as if someone, or something, was deliberately keeping them in the dark. Then, one evening, while going through some old security footage, Emma made a discovery that would change everything. She rewound the video, her eyes scanning the grainy footage of a meeting room. And there, in the corner, was a familiar face, someone Daniel never thought he'd see again. "What is this?" Emma said, her voice rising in shock. Daniel leaned in, his breath catching in his throat. On the screen was none other than his own father, Gregory Miller, the very man who had sent him on this mission in the first place. "Dad, what is he doing there?" Daniel whispered, his mind racing. Emma paused the video. This changes everything. Your father is involved. He's not just in the dark like you thought." Daniel's heart sank. "No, this can't be true. My father is a part of this." He ran a hand through his hair, the weight of the revelation crashing down on him. "But why? Why would he hide something like this from me?" Emma stared at him with a mixture of sympathy and concern. "We don't have all the answers yet, Daniel, but we need to find him. He's the key to everything." It wasn't long before Daniel and Emma tracked down Gregory's whereabouts. He was staying in a luxurious penthouse on the outskirts of the city, far from the public eye. Daniel's heart pounded as they approached the building, his mind reeling from the questions that had been swirling for days. As they entered the penthouse, the familiar scent of leather and expensive cologne filled the air. Gregory was standing by the large windows, his back to them as he looked out over the city. "Dad." Daniel's voice was shaky, but it held a note of anger. "What is all of this? What's going on?" Gregory didn't turn around right away. Instead, he sighed deeply, as though he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. I should have told you sooner, Daniel, he said quietly. But you wouldn't have understood. Not then. Daniel's fist clenched. I don't understand now, either. Why are you involved in this? Gregory finally turned to face him, his expression unreadable. Because I'm trying to protect you, he said, his voice calm but filled with an underlying tension. You were always meant for more, Daniel. But I couldn't let you be a part of this world. Not yet. Emma stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. What do you mean, not yet? What is this all about? Gregory's eyes flicked to Emma, and for the first time, Daniel saw something resembling regret in his father's gaze. You were never supposed to be part of this, but I see now that you've already gone too far. You've learned too much. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. What are you saying? Are you behind this all along? Gregory's expression darkened, and he took a step toward them. It's not what you think. I had to do this to protect you. There are forces at work that you can't even begin to understand. You're the one pulling the strings? Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. Gregory nodded slowly. It was always meant to be this way. But now you have a choice, Daniel. You can walk away, forget all of this, and go back to your normal life. Or you can join me, and we'll make sure this world is ours. Daniel felt the weight of his father's words pressed down on him like a vice. The choice he'd been given felt like no choice at all. Daniel stood frozen, his mind struggling to comprehend what his father had just said. His heart raced, and the room felt smaller, the walls closing in on him. The weight of the decision that loomed before him felt suffocating. Could he really join his father in this world of secrecy and power? Emma glanced at Daniel, her face filled with concern. She stepped forward, her voice steady but tinged with frustration. Daniel, don't listen to him. You don't have to be a part of this. Gregory's eyes flashed with irritation. You don't understand, Emma. This isn't just about power, it's about survival. There are people out there who will stop at nothing to tear everything down. I had to prepare Daniel, make sure he was ready for the world he's going to inherit. Daniel's mind raced. He had always trusted his father, admired him, but now everything seemed tainted. What world, Dad? What is this world you've built? Is it all about control, manipulation, and lies? Gregory's face hardened. You think you could just walk away from this, Daniel? You think you can go back to being the naive kid you were? The world you live in is a lie. The people you trust, the systems you rely on, they're all designed to keep you in the dark. Emma stepped between Daniel and Gregory. That's exactly why you shouldn't be involved in this. You don't need to be a part of this corrupt world. You've built something good with your life already. Don't throw it all away for him. Gregory's eyes darkened, his expression turning cold. You think you're better than this, Emma? You think you have a moral high ground? This isn't about right and wrong. This is about survival. And I will do whatever it takes to make sure my son is prepared for what's coming. The tension in the room grew unbearable, a heavy silence hanging between them. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. His whole life, he had believed in doing the right thing and following the rules. But now, his father was telling him that those rules were a lie. Could he walk away from everything he had ever known? Daniel's gaze drifted to Emma, who was looking at him with such intensity that it almost felt like she was reading his thoughts. Her expression was full of trust, full of hope. Hope that he wouldn't make the same mistake his father had made. I can't be part of this, Daniel said, his voice shaking, but resolute. I won't let you drag me into this world of corruption and control. I want nothing to do with it. Gregory's face twisted into a cruel smile. Then you're making a mistake, son. A big mistake. For a moment, the room seemed to crackle with unspoken tension, and Daniel's heart hammered in his chest. But then, Emma reached out and touched his arm. Her presence grounded him, reminding him of the life he had worked so hard to build, a life based on integrity and kindness, not manipulation and power. You don't have to follow him, Daniel, Emma whispered, her voice filled with conviction. We can still make a difference. Together. Gregory's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched. You'll regret this. Both of you. Without another word, Daniel turned and walked out of the penthouse, Emma by his side. They didn't look back, even as the weight of their decision pressed down on them. They had chosen a different path, one that didn't involve power or control, but truth and justice. The days following Daniel's confrontation with his father were some of the hardest he had ever faced. News of his defiance spread quickly through the business world, and soon, the consequences of his actions began to take shape. Gregory's influence ran deep, and anyone who had ever been close to him now viewed Daniel with suspicion. In the weeks that followed, Daniel and Emma found themselves isolated from their former allies. Colleagues who once admired Daniel now avoided him, and the weight of being the son of such a powerful figure became unbearable. Despite the pressure, Daniel remained determined to stay true to his values. He continued to work with Emma to uncover the truth behind his father's operations, knowing that the fight was far from over. One afternoon, as they sat in their small office, sifting through documents and trying to piece together the puzzle, Daniel's phone rang. His father's name flashed on the screen. Daniel hesitated for a moment, then answered. "What do you want?" Gregory's voice was cold, laced with venom. "You've made your choice, Daniel. But understand this. I'll make sure you never find peace. You think you're safe? You think you're above it all? You're nothing without me." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine, but he held his ground. "I don't need you. I never did. And I'll make sure everyone knows the truth about what you've been doing." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Gregory spoke again. "You think you've won, son? You've only just begun to understand the game you're playing. When it's all over, you'll see. And when that day comes, you'll realize you've made the biggest mistake of your life." Daniel slammed the phone down, his heart pounding. He knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. But he also knew one thing for sure. He wasn't backing down. As the months went on, Daniel and Emma's investigation uncovered more and more of Gregory's hidden empire. They discovered illegal transactions, corrupt business deals, and a network of powerful people who had been working behind the scenes to control the city's economy. But Daniel wasn't satisfied with just exposing the truth. He wanted justice, and he would do whatever it took to bring his father's empire crashing down. One night, they found themselves standing in front of a grand building, one of Gregory's many properties. The evidence they had gathered was enough to take down the entire operation, but they needed one final piece of the puzzle. As they walked inside, they were met by a man who had once been a trusted associate of Gregory's. He had agreed to meet them in secret, offering them information that could be the key to bringing down the entire network. "Are you sure about this?" the man asked, his voice low. "This is bigger than you think." Daniel nodded. "I'm sure. It's time to end this." The man handed over a flash drive containing crucial information. "Be careful. There are people who will stop at nothing to protect what they've built, including your father." Daniel's jaw tightened. He had already made his choice. The stakes were higher than ever, but he was ready as he and Emma walked out of the building. They knew the final confrontation with Gregory was drawing near. The end of this battle would come sooner than either of them expected. The following morning, Daniel and Emma were back at their small office, staring at the flash drive. Their plan was set. The truth about Gregory's empire was ready to be exposed. All they had to do was release it to the public, but they knew that doing so would make them enemies of some of the most dangerous people in the city. Daniel felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had been in the shadows of his father's empire for too long, but now it was his time to step into the light. The moment of truth was almost here. Emma looked at him, her expression determined. "We can't hesitate. We have everything we need." Daniel nodded. He had already come too far to turn back now. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady but tinged with the adrenaline rushing through his veins. "Let's end this." Together, they began the process of releasing the evidence. They uploaded the files to multiple news outlets, ensuring that the world would see what Gregory had been hiding for years. As the information began to spread, Daniel felt a sense of relief, mixed with a rising anxiety. The storm was coming, and he didn't know who would come out on top. Within hours, the city was in chaos. News outlets were running special reports on Gregory's illegal activities, and protests erupted outside his businesses. The authorities had already begun their investigation, and it seemed as though the walls were closing in on his empire. Gregory was not one to go down quietly. He had spent decades building his power, and he wasn't about to lose it without a fight. Behind the scenes, his people were scrambling to cover their tracks, but it was clear that things were unraveling faster than they could contain. Daniel and Emma watched the news unfold from their office, both of them feeling a strange mix of triumph and dread. The world was finally seeing the truth, but they knew that this wasn't the end of the battle. It was only the beginning. As the hours passed, Daniel received an unexpected call. It was from his father, Daniel. Gregory's voice was cold, but there was an edge of something deeper, something desperate. "You think you've won? You've made a grave mistake." Daniel clenched his fists, standing tall. "I'm not backing down, Dad. This ends today." Gregory's laugh was dark and hollow. "You're a fool if you think you can destroy me. You're nothing without me. I've built this city. You'll see. No one turns against me and survives." The line went dead. Daniel stared at the phone for a moment before slamming it down onto the desk. His father's words were nothing more than empty threats, but deep inside, Daniel knew that Gregory wouldn't go down without a fight. The final confrontation was still ahead. The following day, Daniel and Emma were preparing to go public with a final piece of evidence, the proof that would bring down Gregory once and for all. They had already contacted the authorities, who were set to arrest Gregory, but Daniel knew that his father wouldn't give up easily. The tension in the air was palpable. Every moment felt like it could be the last before the storm hit. Daniel and Emma walked into the office, their eyes locked on the flash drive that held the final piece of the puzzle. Suddenly, the door swung open, and in walked two of Gregory's enforcers. Daniel's heart skipped a beat, but he stood his ground. He wasn't going to let his father intimidate him anymore. "What do you want?" Daniel demanded, his voice firm. One of the enforcers, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, sneered. "Your father wants to see you." Now, Daniel knew this was it. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him. He wasn't going to back down now. He had come too far. "I'm not going anywhere with you," Daniel said, his voice steady. The other enforcer stepped forward, grabbing Daniel by the arm. "You don't have a choice." But before the situation could escalate further, Emma stepped in, her voice calm but authoritative. "We have all the evidence we need to bring down your boss. If you lay a hand on him, you'll regret it." The enforcers exchanged uneasy glances. They had underestimated Daniel and Emma. They knew they were standing on the edge of a precipice, and the consequences of their actions could be far-reaching. "We'll see about that," the scarred enforcer muttered, before backing down. Daniel and Emma exchanged a look of determination. This was far from over, but they were prepared for whatever came next. The day of the final confrontation had arrived. Daniel and Emma were standing in front of the courthouse, the world waiting for them to make their move. The evidence they had gathered was irrefutable, and Gregory's empire was crumbling. But as they entered the courtroom, they were met with an unexpected sight. Gregory was sitting in the defendant's chair, his cold eyes locked on Daniel. "You think you've won, don't you?" Gregory sneered. Daniel took a deep breath, walking confidently to the stand. "This isn't about winning, Dad. It's about doing what's right. It's about bringing the truth to light." The courtroom buzzed with tension as the trial began. Daniel and Emma sat side by side, ready to take down the empire that had ruled their lives for so long. As the evidence was presented, it became clear that Gregory's grip on power was slipping. His connections were unraveling, and the truth was finally out in the open. But Gregory wasn't going down without a fight. As the trial progressed, he grew increasingly agitated, his desperation palpable. He made his final attempt to turn the tables, but it was too late. The weight of his crimes was too much to bear, and soon, the judge rendered a guilty verdict that Gregory's empire was officially destroyed. The man who had once controlled everything now faced the consequences of his actions. The months that followed were a whirlwind. Gregory's assets were seized, and his network of powerful allies was dismantled. The city began to heal, and Daniel's name became synonymous with justice and integrity. Emma stood by his side through it all, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. Together, they built a new life, a life free from the shadows of the past. Daniel had made the right choice. He had chosen truth over power, integrity over control, and love over manipulation. And in the end, that choice had set him free.